Hi, everyone. Welcome to Dice Forum. My name is Ami Dang, and I'm an artist, musician, composer, producer from Baltimore. That's in the United States. It's a small city for those of you who don't know. And I'm really excited to be here today with you here on Dice Forum with an artist from New York. But actually, before we get started, I'm just going to mention that we're going to talk a little bit. This series is all about having artists an artist from New York. But actually, before we get started, I'm just going to mention that we're going to. Sorry, there was a little interruption, so I got a little distracted. But I just wanted to let you know that we're going to talk a little bit first, and then we'll have a Q&A through the chat function at the end of our chat. And this series is all about having artists interview other artists. So I'm really excited to be here today. With an amazing artist from New York. Taja, do you want to go ahead and do, I really like it when the artists introduce themselves, because I think that's really important, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name is Taja. I usually perform under the name Lorraine. I'm a songwriter from Brooklyn, where I currently am.
Yeah. Amazing. Yay. Yeah, so I have kind of questions about trying to decide how I want to do this. Questions about more like your life as an artist and like where you're coming from and creativity and identity, and then sort of more like what's going on these days. So I don't know if you have a preference of where you want to start, more recent or sort of digging in. Okay. All right. Well, maybe I read a bunch of, interviews that you've done in the past and, some various features about your work. So I apologize if anything is redundant, but I am always really curious to hear about sort of like where artists are coming from, their identity and their family. And it seems like from what I read, you live in the neighborhood or at least nearby to where you actually grew up. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's true. My dad, I grew up in the house that my dad also lived in with his dad.
Wow.
And we ended up moving, but I'm back in the neighborhood. And it sort of feels like I've been here forever, if that makes sense. I feel my family around, even the ones that have passed. It feels like a very, I don't know, like a potent place to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have a lot of musicians in your family, is that correct too?
Not a lot. My dad works in music, but not a lot of musicians.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you think when you were, I don't know how long it's been. Have you been playing music since you were a little kid or making art, or like have you been a creative person since you were really young?
I think so. Yeah. I was always around. My parents were always encouraging me to like learn things, like learn, piano and recorder and all those things. And that's always kind of been a part of my life.
Yeah. Was that a big surprise when you wanted to like do, and I guess also we'll get into this a little bit too, but you also work full time, but you work in the arts, right? If as long as you still have to do the same thing. But and you're a cultural organizer, I guess I should say, like more widely, it seems. So was that like a big surprise or like a big deal to you that you wanted to kind of integrate creativity into your life as an adult, or was it sort of just like, oh, of course you would do that, like,
yeah, that's a good question. I feel like it's the only thing I knew in some ways. Like it was the thing that I had been doing my whole life. So it didn't really occur to me that there were other things that I would try, or at least I remember a moment when I was young and I was sort of asking myself, okay, I have to make sure I don't want to be a doctor or a lawyer now. I need to no, and then I'll just continue on my path. And I thought about it and watched videos and read, and I was like, this is not for me. I know what I want in my life.
Yeah. So you're a musician, but you currently work with PS1. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And what do you do there?
I'm a curator, associate curator working in performance. So I organize the Sunday Sessions series, all the things that happen there's a big geodesic dome that we would build every year and have performances inside of. And then the warm-up music series in the summer. And then if there are performances that are accompanying exhibitions, I organize those too.
Yeah. And how long have you been working there? It's been like a few years at least.
It feels like my whole life.
Yeah.
But since 2016.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a good chunk of time, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. How has that been for you with the pandemic? So like I guess more specifically, how were you able to pivot with regards to like booking shows or events, yeah, just curious to hear about your experiences in that world.
I mean, someone mentioned this phrase to me and it feels like the best phrase to describe what it feels like. It's like you're building the plane while flying the plane, right? I think we're all in that situation where we're really learning in real time, where, we didn't have a very robust digital program. We had spent zero time on Zoom and we had to adapt and pivot. But I also am sort of resisting that quick pivot in a lot of ways too, where I feel like the entirety of our field, it's not even really a field, performance is so broad and it encompasses so many different fields like theater and music and dance and all of those things. But like all of our fields are really just sort of like being, I don't know, we're trying to figure out what the core is of what we do in really real ways. It's like our foundation has been rocked to its core. A lot of the venues that we supported and performed in and visited are not going to be around anymore. And so I'm trying to, as much as I can, really try to pause and build that into my work, to really think about what the implications of this moment are and how to, I don't know, just think with other people, because I definitely don't have the answers on my own at all.
Yeah.
And that's been the only good thing that has come out of this, has been I've had to talk to my colleagues a lot more just to figure out what they're doing and how they're approaching things, because we have no idea what to do, if we're being honest, I feel like, with ourselves.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious to know, like, what is everybody talking about? I mean, I'd imagine like it's really hard to plan, right? Like planning for 3 months or 6 months out is just like, it almost feels to me like maybe that's pointless, because you might put a lot of work into planning something that will just come crashing down. But like how, if you're having these sort of like strategic talks with, I don't know if it's all internal or like externally also with like other venues and other organizers, like what are you guys talking about, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's happening in pockets. Like a lot of the New York independent venues are organizing together and are talking about legislation and are talking about their experiences. And I've been sort of peering into that a little bit. I think for cultural institutions, it's maybe more siloed, at least in my experience, where a lot of us are just kind of, I don't know, focused on the more immediate issues and just pivoting our programming for the most part. A lot of us also, I mean, all of us have been undergoing really severe changes to staffing, to protocols. Talked to a lot of people about, when we were first planning warm up this year, we were talking about just like ways of keeping safe in that kind of really pragmatic way. And yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of conversations, but I feel like there can still be more, and there can be more cross-disciplinary conversations. Like a lot of the conversations around independent venues, for example, were happening around food and beverage because of like the commerce aspect of it. And so it's like all of these conversations are happening in ways that are dictated by like money,
Yeah.
frankly. But I think there are other concerns that are really just like, what are we doing? What is performance? How do we support each other, that are more basic? And I'm still trying to figure out how to get there.
Totally. Did you actually end up, I'm sorry if I haven't been following too closely what's happening in New York, to be honest.
Yeah.
Did you end up programming anything like outdoors, for example? I mean, warm up happens outdoors, but obviously it's generally a very packed experience. So I don't think that happened. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe just tell me a little bit more. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just saying it happened in a new kind of way where we ended up streaming the performances, but also partnered with venues to have places for people to safely gather. So, you know, a lot of places that have outdoor spaces that were already operating as venues and or restaurants. And yeah, just partnering with them so that people could come and watch the stream and listen to the music. Because there was something about a traditional stream that is great, and it's good to have more access, but there is something about the communal aspect of music that I really miss and feels like the core of the program and the core of what I'm interested in. And so that was the only way that we could really think of that we could quickly organize and safely organize. Definitely.
I think I've booked shows in my past, but I'm not really booking shows in this present, or, you know, I'm not like organizing live streams, I should say, but I've been asked to do them. And I get that. I feel like when everything shut down, I was personally like super frustrated with the amount of sort of like, I get that everyone was like, we don't know what to do, so we'll just organize live streams. But then there was this expectation that those could happen really easily and really quickly. And I was like, I need to like, you know, clean up my space and set up my space and like probably use 2 computers, like things that like logistically, you know, sometimes in a bigger way, really what I was going to start talking about was that feeling of like being with people in a room that is, to me, just like incredibly critical when I play music, because I love performing and I'm a natural performer. For me, like the first aspect of music I enjoy is performance and like being in a space together with people. So like to ask me to do the live streams was just like this really horrible facsimile of, you know, I was like, go listen to the record, you know, or yeah. So, but I get it that like everyone was just like, we don't know what to do, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I wanted to comment on that too, because I think and no offense to people for whom, like, some people were really excited about the live streams too, to be able to like take
performance that, I don't know, people, I agree. People just sort of thought that it would be easy to transition to, but there's so many other aspects of just like having a space, having the equipment, like that's not something to take for granted at all. And I think now we're in a place where people recognize that, and producers are kind of catching up. But at the beginning, it was like, just do a live stream. And I'm like, how?
Yeah.
Where? It's a different kind of performance entirely. And it's a different emotional experience and like physical experience, just in every way. It's just so different.
Yeah, to me personally, it like felt really sterile was like the word I think using, just because like that, like, okay, I'm on. Are people there? You know, are you out there? It's like, and then at the end, like, bye, I'm done, thanks, you know. Just like no feedback, you know. And I guess on the other hand, I have watched some live streams and like been on the chats and, you know, really enjoyed that, and actually think like we've all done as good a job as we could have done. So that's, you know, we're all making the best of it, I guess. But yeah.
There's also an aspect of it too that I did like, which was that it felt like everyone was just way more forgiving in general. Like if there's a mistake, if someone, you know, the production end or the performance end. It didn't really matter. We were all just like so grateful to be in one virtual space together. And I hope I don't lose sight of that, and I hope we don't lose sight of that, because that was actually kind of beautiful to see major institutions like having glitches in their programming, and it was fine. We all were just like, we're doing the best we can. We're here. It's fine.
Totally. It really felt to me in a way more connected to like the DIY kind of space roots that like personally when I started playing shows, I was like playing in pretty nasty basements and like lots of warehouses and and still have continued some of that like when possible. But of course we both know like after the ghost ship fire in Oakland, so many spaces around the US shut down, and like all the DIY touring that I did before and after the ghost ship fire were like, it was like really two separate like chunks of time for me personally. So, but it's really interesting because I do think in a way the live streams like reflected that a little bit because like you said, like you mentioned that a lot of the conversations in New York that are happening have to do with the commerce aspect of presenting music. So the food and beverage aspect, but maybe like the live streams in some ways felt a lot more authentically rooted in like wanting to share culture and experience, which was,
Totally. I like that. I wouldn't have made that connection, but I think you're right. There is like a DIY like ethos that's in there somewhere. Super cool. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, aside from the fact that Twitch is like owned by Amazon or something, like, that's, I wasn't planning to go down that rabbit hole, but, or that, whatever, all the live streams, right? Like Facebook, YouTube,
right.
Aside from all the server space and everything. So, who knows? And the surveillance aspect also was not trying to go down that. Yeah. I am curious to see how, I don't know. I haven't personally had a lot of hope for like that DIY culture returning after the ghost ship fire, but I am curious to see. I don't know what that's gonna, if you have any like thoughts on what that could be like in our post-COVID era.
I don't know. It's really, I don't leave my apartment very much, so it's hard to get a sense, but in Brooklyn, maybe a little bit less so, but the times that I've gone to Manhattan, it just feels like a ghost town there.
Yeah.
And there's something about it that just keeps reminding me of like, I don't know, like the 1970s in New York also. And there are all these performances happening outside, and there was a certain kind of energy. And I feel like, I don't know, there are things about that I hope we can return to, and things about it that I hope we don't. But there is like some feeling of possibility in that somehow, that things like have to break apart to be rebuilt or something, if I'm feeling optimistic about it.
Yeah, I'm curious. I feel like I have ideas of what will happen again, but it all hinges on like, will there be funding for venues to reopen, and or either new venues or venues that existed once before, and I just feel like I have no idea. I think that's the scary part. One thing I keep saying to people is like, I feel worried that people are going to party like really hard when they're like allowed to go out again.
Totally.
And there's going to be some like control issues or whatever, a lot of throwing people out of bars or whatever, and out of shows potentially, which personally, like and this is something maybe actually I didn't think about. I planned some questions and then I figured we would just talk, but like I think maybe you are on the same page with this, where like you play a lot of different kinds of venues. So I personally have played like I mentioned before, like DIY spaces, kind of like gross basements and warehouses. And then I've played a lot of clubs, but like that's not really my preferred space to present my work. I prefer for it to be in like some kind of a seated, more intimate venue when possible. But I was just wondering if you want to talk about that, I guess, hopefully, well, I guess I was, the thread there was I was thinking about like, hopefully not having to play in clubs where like many people are like totally messed up. In my music is like, it's not necessarily like quiet, but it's like a little more cerebral, I guess. So it just feels like having a lot of wasted people in the room would not be too far gone is like not my ideal, but that's, you know, it's cool. Depends what kind, you know.
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, I do feel like I always wonder about the possibility of more venues and spaces that aren't tied to alcohol. And I have like no judgment on like any drug use of any kind, really. But I also just like wish that that didn't have to be the uniting factor. And I understand that it does because of economics, but it just seems like a bad model or not the best model, at least. And I feel like a lot of the reasons that my live show developed in the ways that it did actually was kind of like a response to that in some ways. I was just playing bars. And I wanted to try to find a way to transform those spaces in some way where you're, you know, on your phone and you're talking loudly and you're like having fun. And like, that's also me, I do that. But I also wanted to try to figure out if there's a way to disrupt that totally. And for like 20-30 minutes, just have everyone just together in a room really experiencing something. And so I started really building my show as a way to like disrupt that feeling of being in a bar and turn it into something else. So in some ways I really like having the seated venues, but then that feeling of transformation isn't as, it's already kind of there.
Yes.
So it's harder to figure out what to do or how to perform in those spaces for me, because there's something about like I don't know, transgression is the wrong word, but I don't know, transformation that is important to me. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think you and I are really on the same page. So I did a lot of touring really like right until the pandemic started. And the last two big tours I did, so let's say the last like 20 shows I think I played, I asked people to sit down in my set, which like, and these were in clubs that are not spaces people sit down in. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards and were like, I've never sat down before. And then I got a message or a comment on an Instagram post like, I love your show, but I sat in a puddle of beer. Like all these like, you know, which was really, it was like a really interesting experiment. But it, like for me personally, it worked really, really well. And it seemed to, for the most part, work for most people. And, you know, and I gave people the option to do whatever they wanted. And I just asked if people wanted to keep standing, that they like move to the side or the back and, you know, let other people who want to sit down come forward. But it's interesting. And I think from that experience, I realized I was kind of leaning more toward playing kind of concert halls or seated venues. But you're absolutely right. I don't think I thought about that so much, that I really enjoyed that moment, that transformation that happens where you're going from this rowdy, very active space to one that is like way more focused. That's a really good way to put it, because I don't feel like I was still struggling with this notion of like, do I only want to play, you know, kind of seated concert halls going forward? But like that also was not feeling ideal for me.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I'm glad we're finally talking.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to I've been so curious about this also. I feel like that's something that I definitely struggle with in the live performance, the live aspect, or just like the act of like asking someone to sit. There's always this strange moment where people are like, you can see it on their faces. I don't know if you've experienced this, where they're like, should I do this or not? And it's really kind of like a weird, I don't know, like trying to understand the rules of engagement. Or I guess the better way of putting it is, anytime you go to see a show, you're always kind of learning the rules of engagement, but they're not made explicit. Mm-hmm. But when you're asking someone to sit, it's a moment where the fact that there are rules are made more explicit. So you have to figure out if you want to comply, right? Totally. Or the audience is like, do I have to do what the performer is asking me, or what does it mean if I don't? Am I having like the most optimal experience of this music? I don't know. It makes it more explicit in ways where it's like really just a tacit thing. Otherwise, I hadn't really thought about until just now.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I really always enjoyed the look on people's faces. Just like really self-indulgent of like this sort of confused, like, is she for real? Like asking me to sit on the floor of this club. And it's funny because for me, actually, I perform seated on the floor with my sitar. And so I don't know if I mentioned this to you all who are out there before, but I play the sitar. It's an Indian classical instrument and use live electronics. But I do play the sitar in the traditional way in terms of like being seated on the floor. And so in a lot of venues, it was hard for people to see me depending on like the height of the stage. And so that sort of, my asking people to sit down was kind of to address that, because then I was like, getting kind of frustrated with this idea of like, oh, I've traveled like hundreds, maybe, thousands of miles to come to this place. And like the only people who are going to see are like the first two rows. Like that just seems really kind of silly. And, that doesn't really seem like the greatest idea. So I started asking people to sit. But it's really funny to see people have this like hesitation of like you said, the being asked, like not really knowing how to engage, or like the rules of engagement, but then being told to do something that's like so goes against like how they would otherwise behave in this kind of traditional like rock club. It's fun.
It is fun. It's like a kind of twisted element to it where I'm like, I don't know. Like the sadistic part of me is sort of like, you have to sit on the floor now. Yeah. I also sit too, so I feel like we're right. It's a way of like we're on the same page. Totally.
Have you been playing music with other people during the pandemic, or has that not been? Have you not felt safe actually doing that? I'm not sure how.
Yeah, I've thought about it and then not done it. I haven't played much music at all. I haven't been super inspired to. I'm only now kind of getting to the point where I'm feeling like I can maybe start doing that, but I really just took a break, a long break. I think I needed it in some ways, but I also, I don't know, there was too much going on. It was too heavy. I couldn't like move through it somehow.
Totally.
What about you? How are you?
It's been touch and go for me. I think it's been the same thing where like, I don't know, a lot of people, I don't have I'm not working a full-time job in a traditional sense that I'm working for one company, but I do like a bunch of freelance work and I've gotten like other gigs have come up, which have been great, but like, I feel like that's sort of as much time as I can spend. And then I kind of get tapped out in the evenings and I'm just like, well, like you said, I'm not like feeling super inspired, or I think I'm someone who has like trouble like forcing myself to have a daily practice. It's either sort of like I'll get into a mode and like work on music really hard for an intense period of time and then not for a long time. So that's kind of how it's been for me. It's been like in spurts. Like in April, I did actually record an EP over the course of like 10 days that came out in May. And then, but like, I'd say that was like the most focused 10 days of music I've had since that time, and then little bits and pieces here and there, but not in a way that, I wish, I don't know. So it is what it is.
That was recorded in April. That's
yeah. It was a long time. Well, my EP Meditations mixtape was recorded in April. Yeah. So yeah, and that was totally a product of like this happening. I was like, I have other songs I've been working on for like years that were going to be like the next album, which who knows, whenever that they come, they'll come out or not in some way, right? I guess so. If you haven't, is that more like what your process is? You sort of like tinker over periods of time and.
Yeah, it was actually, it was nice to hear you say that because I always feel a sense of guilt when I'm not like playing music. And I guess a lot of people feel this, but it doesn't make me feel better. But it is kind of in spurts too, where I just like won't, or I feel like my songwriting practice is, it's not all based at instruments. I guess I like think about songs in my head for a long period of time. We'll like record voice memos of like me singing to myself, and I have like lots of those, and I listen to them a week later. I'm like, what is this? That kind of thing. But yeah,
I have those.
Yeah, I've been wanting to try to force myself to make music, I don't know, with a more regular schedule, and it's been hard, but I feel like there are periods in my life where it's actually really good for me to try to just like force myself to do something like that. And it really wasn't for a long time. And now I'm like, that might actually be helpful to just kind of get ideas out and not censor myself. And I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I do think it's really important to like reset your creative practice when you feel like frustrated with it. And I feel like I'm constantly like trying to or like feel like I should and not really doing it, but like refresh or reset sort of my music practice. And there's this notion of like it being work, because I'm working on music right now, you know, but then also I'm like, no, I really need to just remember that like we play music, and like I should be playing and thinking of it as play, and rather than the like guilt that comes along with like I need to work on music right now, right? Like that feeling. And I think actually one thing for me that was been great, one of the things I've been busy with in this pandemic is I haven't been ever given too many music lessons, but I'm doing these like sing along music lessons with my almost 5-year-old niece on Zoom twice a week, which yeah, it's like super cute and really sweet. It started when like she's an only child and like had been home, you know, from daycare starting in March, and like, you know, didn't, you know, it was like her parents were like, we got to figure out stuff to do with her. And we're still doing that even though she's back in school, although like, I don't know, sort of. But yeah, it just kind of reminded me of like, I can sing just for the sake of singing, you know, and like should try to still cultivate that, because, and that's also like, I'm trying to like impart that value on a child. So it's important for me to like fully embody that. Yeah.
I love that. I feel like having a sense of play and wonder and just kind of like experimenting with things and like the core sense of it, not like as a genre, is really, I don't know, it's really important. And I feel like I'm always trying to get back to that. And kids remind me of that a lot. And I've started like collecting all of these like kids toys as instruments to try to get back to that in some way, which people think is really crazy. But I would go to these 99-cent stores and just kind of like buy these baby toys, like the musical ones that have buttons, and just trying to like pull something from those. But new project I'm working on, there's like a lot of that in there, just like used as like source material, because it's literal play.
Yeah.
Piece with it, it's just kind of playing around with sound and seeing what happens with it. But I feel like on my worst days, I get like, that's when I'm the furthest away from that. And on my best days, that's when I'm really tapping into that the most. And
definitely.
I love that you brought that up.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard when, like you were saying, there's that guilt to like achieve the next milestone. So a song, a track, maybe a lot of people have been putting out compilations, and I've been asked to participate, and like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm working on something new, I'll like have it finished. And it's like, no, I've had to turn them down a few times. But it's like, I think it's hard. And again, it's like this imposed like kind of capitalist structure of like having deadlines for something that I don't think, for me anyway, is like not really conducive to like my true creative practice. So yeah, I don't know how, especially because like music is so spiritual, right? Like I just, yeah, I don't know if you have any other ideas about that.
This I didn't know how much I needed to hear this. This conversation is so affirming for me. Yeah, it is spiritual. I feel like I don't, it's really funny to me that I don't know, that my music is described as spiritual, that I'm described as spiritual. Just no knowing what I used to be like. Like I was so against it in a lot of ways that weren't really thought through ever. But it was just kind of like a knee-jerk reaction. And I think closer to, lately I've been thinking more about that, and I've been sort of using my music as a way of just sorting through things that are difficult for me, on like every level, things about myself that I'm trying to change, or processing like grief, or processing like big changes in my life and things like that. So it became a spiritual practice, but it was never like, I am going to be spiritual now, or like, I think of myself as a spiritual person. Like I really didn't before this last record, and it just kind of happened. I'm sort of finding my way, or finding my path through just making things. And it's been the coolest part of the past couple of years has been connecting with people about their own spiritual path, or they're using my music to process things that they're going through and things like that, which I never would have ever expected. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. I found myself in this world, but I don't really, I sometimes I'm like, maybe I'm an imposter because I don't really like know what I'm doing, and I'm not like, knowledgeable about like different spiritual practices and things like that. But it's just, I just kind of do what feels good to me, and I'm figuring it out in real time. And that's all I can do. And I'm just learning as I go.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of people I don't love the term experimental music because it means so many things, but I should say, like, for a lot of people whose music is experimental in some way, their practice is kind of like constantly changing, and can, versus like a producer who maybe like has this very kind of like strict way of like creating music. And to me, that's fine. I just think having an evolving practice like allows for a lot more surprise and a lot more change in a way that to me is like artistically and culturally interesting, right? Yeah,
I think so. It also, like, in some ways allows for I don't know the best way of phrasing this, but if you're I feel like, at least for me, I feel like my music changes a lot. So it forces me to sort of think about the things that are me. Like, what is the core that stays the same as things change? Like, what are the limits of what this project is? I never really wanted to create a new musical project. It just kind of happened. So now I'm like, okay, what are the limits of this thing I made? Like, what are the things that are interesting to me, and what unites all of it, which is not something that I would have necessarily thought about if I was like, this is my band, this is my project, this is what it is. So that's kind of, I'm always kind of like searching in a way.
Right. Do you feel like that? Oh, I was just gonna say, like, do you feel like that reaction has affected like how you might think going forward about the music you're making, or like a body of work, sort of like approaching it in a more specific way or intentional in certain aspects?
I think maybe just because the more things I make, I feel like the more things I want to, it's easier to figure out where the boundaries are when you have more things in the world, I guess. Or what boundaries you want to push. But right now I'm sort of like, what is this? How does this work? Or I guess, like, on an instinctual level, I feel like my body knows what it is, or like I am just creating what makes sense, and I'm trying to catch up with what I'm doing, if that makes sense. Like, I know something's happening, I know it's all cohesive, but I'm trying to process what I'm doing.
Totally. Yeah, I feel like for me with music, that's like all the time, because, like, again, I guess coming back to that, I just use this because other people use it, but like the experimental thing, like when you make work that is not just like the same kind of like, find a process and repeat it, like, I don't know where it's going, just like that it's, you're kind of, your body and your subconscious are kind of always interacting with the conscious like decisions or rules
Yeah,
that you might put into place. And yeah, which is good. I think like that, like one in a creative sense should allow for that and not like push that away.
totally. Yeah. I mean, that also made me think that I feel like, I don't know, this is maybe a tangent, but I feel like in general also, I don't know, I keep picking up on your resistance to the word experimental, and like I feel that too. But I think it's also because
That's
I feel
fine.
like a lot more music is experimental than what is credited as experimental, if that makes
Right.
sense. Like only sort of
Totally.
one little thing, one little box.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, I don't know. I
Well,
just
to
feel
me,
like,
it's just like, isn't that just like what postmodern music is? If we're
yeah,
going to go along with the definition of like, if you're talking about like postmodernism in culture and in art, you know, like everything to me right now is experimental unless you like are copying something extremely classical, like to the, you know, like, and going along with all of those rules, right?
yeah,
Um, and very few artists are doing that, right? And you might do that to like get you, you know, as an exercise, as a study to like get you to another place. But like, as soon as you sort of like start to break any rules or create your own, then it's could be experimental in some way or
yeah,
postmodern, which yeah, I
totally.
prefer. I don't know. Yeah. How I guess going back to like maybe how do you think you like are there things aspects of your creative process that affect the way that you operate in your work and the way you book artists or like curate, I should say. Yeah.
That's a good question. I feel like I generally try to cut them off as much as
Yeah.
possible, to think of them as two very separate things, but it's all water from the same well. It's all just me. So things that that resonate with me in my own music are things that are going to resonate with me, um, like in my curatorial work. But I guess the difference is that I think of, I think any good curator is thinking about their own interest and tapping into that, but also thinking about the context that it's in. So in that way, like I am a curator at PS1, but I am a curator for PS1 too. Like that's always in entering my decisions and the history of that institution, and just like architecturally, I don't know, like so in so many ways it affects the choices that I make.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like a very separate thing, but it's all just things I'm interested in and paying attention to. And I try my best to try to like expand both, but it all kind of comes down to things that I don't know. It's me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. How do you feel? How seriously do you feel like people? Okay, so I guess I should preface this another way. Um, Due to like BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, that is like really ongoing. You know, as you know, and as everyone should know by now, there's been a huge push for like more diversity at every level of all organizations, and obviously, you know, many systems. Um, I'm very curious to see now. We're like nearing the end of 2020. We officially, I think Trump is leaving, which is great. But I'm curious. I guess I'm like concerned that people are going to lose steam around those conversations, and I'm curious to know what you think the future holds. Are people really going to take this seriously, like especially in the arts? Yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
That's a great question. And I feel like I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I guess the short I guess in some ways, I don't know, a lot of organizations that should have been thinking about diversity and equity are starting to now, but are not doing it in ways that are really, I don't know, honest, or are really like grasping at the root of a lot of the issues, like the real issues. So I feel like that means that either all of that work will just go away in a few years, or if there are any people of color or any marginalized people of any kind at these organizations, that they'll, if they feel like speaking up, that they will be able to point to that and to, I don't know, get people to actually meaningfully think about these issues. But I don't know, it's kind of, it's a really mixed bag, and it's hard to tell. In my experience, I feel like people don't even really know what they have to give up necessarily. Or they don't really know what is at stake, or, you know, if you can't really identify the real issues, it's hard to change the problem. And I feel like that's kind of the stage that a lot of cultural institutions are in, is just like identifying what needs to change. And that's like a very early stage.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I hope so. I'm not super optimistic, but I'm hoping that, I don't know, there's so much that has to be overhauled for any real change to happen. So yeah, when I'm feeling optimistic, I'm like ready to help make that happen, and I really feel like things will change. And sometimes when I'm feeling really pessimistic, it just feels like it all just has to crumble to the ground, and just kind of like letting that happen so that we can actually build something else.
Totally. Yeah, I do think that's a really tricky part, because I think a lot of organizations are starting to be held accountable, like to like a tiny, very, very small degree. So I wasn't even thinking about this when I asked you this question, but I do grant writing as like another gig of mine. And I write grants for an artist run space, housing and studio and like DIY, well, formerly DIY, now legit space in Baltimore. And I write grants for a museum as well. And it's been really interesting, because a lot of the grant applications, like if they have a new question on there, it's sort of like, how are you addressing diversity and equity and inclusion? So on one hand, I'm like, okay, this is good. Like the funders are like trying to hold these organizations accountable, for better or worse. Also, the funders, that's a whole other conversation. We don't have to get into that. But it's interesting, because then on the other side, I feel like there's such an open-ended question that like basically these organizations can answer them any which way. And I don't know how, I mean, I guess when all the grants show up in front of the jury or whatever foundation board, you know, they'll be able to see maybe if some organizations are like really trying that as hard to integrate diversity at all levels or not, based on those responses. But it is interesting, because I think the questions that are being asked are like really open-ended, and I don't think that that kind of open-endedness is really going to lead to true accountability. But it's a step, so you know.
Yeah, totally. Wow, the grant world is must be insane right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's also like kind of, I mean, it's insane. I think a lot of funders are so focused on pandemic funding, as they should be. But it's then like on the other hand, I don't even know. I don't know. I mean, I don't work on the foundation side, and I never have on the funder side. So it's also like sort of just like business as usual. You know, like I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like things are that different. I mean, I just don't know. So yeah, but maybe we'll take or did you want to?
Oh no.
Yeah, we have a question from our audience, and so our question is: do you feel like after this pandemic and this forced isolation, your way of performing will be impacted, and also your way of creating music? Do you feel like it will somehow try to create other connections with the audience?
That's super interesting. Yes, I feel like in a lot of ways, I've been wanting some time to pause and reset. And this has been that. I'm about to start thinking about what a live set could look like. Not that there's any chance of perform soon, but just as an exercise to figure out where I am. I have a complicated relationship to performing, but I feel like it also is a part of me and it's a part of the project. And to figure that out means I'm figuring out the project more fully. So yeah, I think it will. I don't know how yet, but I'm trying to figure that out. I'm curious how you would answer that also, Ami.
I think like I didn't expect us to get in so much to talking about the feeling of being in a venue when there's like when your set music creates this disruption. So I think like kind of piggybacking on that, that's something that I would hope to like continue to cultivate, is sort of like this change in scene, or change in like not scene but like feeling and ambiance, I guess. But I don't know. On one hand, I'm like, I want to tour. I want to tour so much. I want to go everywhere. But like on the other hand, personally, I was touring a lot in the year leading up to the pandemic. And I think back to that time and I'm like, that was ridiculous, completely absurd. Also, let's not get into the like greenhouse gases emitted because of all the flights and vehicles I was, using for all that touring. And so part of me wonders if would I want to tour that much again? B, is it going to be feasible for me to tour that much again because of venues being around or not? So I just don't know if that, I don't know. I don't know if I have a answer to that. I think that I'm the kind of person who like, I do get really excited when I'm on tour. And so if it starts happening again, I'll just be like, this is great. It'll just keep happening. But I don't know if, I just don't know yet. I think one thing that I actually had been thinking about earlier in the pandemic, but has like totally not come about for me at all, was, I talked to a friend of mine who's really into 360 experiences and like virtual reality. And we talked about the idea of like having some sort of a performative experience where I create like a hologram of myself and do like a performance in that way. I have like no background in VR, AR, so I would definitely have to talk to somebody about that. But I think that could be a really cool, like that was something I thought like, okay, if I end up releasing an album in the pandemic and I want to have this like other experience that's not just listening to it, like maybe having an accompanying virtual experience. It's almost like a short game, or you're like going through a journey and then at the end is like the performance or something. I don't know, it's just an idea.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think it would be really cool. I don't know also though, like I'm not a gamer and I don't own like a Oculus headset or anything, so I have like no, I'm like, yeah, that would only really be for a specific audience. But anyway, yeah. So we have another question. Have you been working on any collaborative projects? Have you found it possible to work on those during this weird time?
I when you were talking about the compilations, that really like spoke to me, because I would always think about them as these possibilities of having these collaborations and doing all these things, and I just couldn't meet a lot of the deadlines. It was just really hard for me. And I felt horrible like turning a lot of them down, or not like turning things in on time, because a lot of them were fundraisers also, and they're things that mattered to me, but it was just it's really hard to do that. Yeah. But I don't think I can talk about any of the collaborative projects yet. But there have been some like longer term things that I've been kind of finishing up. And at some point next year, I hope maybe they will be released.
Yeah, that's exciting. I worked on one. I have a recent project called Galdra Visions, which is like, it was a really exciting project. Yeah, with 3 other women or non-binary, formerly like we're all also sort of solo artists. We all came together to create tracks through like emailing, through file sharing. And honestly, I think that, so the tracks that I worked on, it's an EP that came out in October. And the tracks I worked on were like really close to being finished. So I think that personally helped me, where I feel like I just like sprinkled little things on it. Whereas it's something I think I didn't even think about until more recently, that if I had gotten involved more at the beginning, I think I would have felt overwhelmed. So actually like having the other folks started this project, and then I was kind of brought in as the last person. But that like it worked, and I think I've tried to do that kind of like file sharing style of collaboration in the past, and it didn't really work for me personally. But this music was just like, so I listened and I was like, I have to be on these songs. I was like, okay, I'm going to work on it.
About that, because it's so many people to collaborate with at once, and also like separately. And I don't know, I was just very interested in that. I love all of your music separately, and like listening to it together. It's just so interesting to like try to piece together what I think, you know, certain people's contributions might be.
Yeah, I don't even know. I was like, every time when I listen to songs, like, is that whose voice or whose production? I have no idea. But I will say actually that there was one person who was sort of played the like producer role, who actually is not like one of the 4 people in the band. It's Matthew from Leaving Records. Like really, I think kind of was the one who wrangled all of us and the files, and like having him, I mean, it could have been one of us if somebody had stepped up to it, but like having someone in that role, I think really helps if for people who are working on a file sharing type of project. Wow. Yeah.
Cool.
So we have another question is, I liked the bit about live streams, making artists and companies, etc., more authentic and humane. Have either of you found that live streams have increased your reach to new audiences that you might have not reached before?
That's a good question. I haven't really done very many, so it's hard to tell. It also, I think in general, I've been feeling a little self-conscious in general in this moment, just around like the hyper visibility of like Black and brown artists in general, and feeling uncomfortable about how that really has come through protest. And I've sort of been noticing more people paying attention to my music, but I feel really complicated about it in those ways. So I feel like I've been paying more attention to that than I have like live streams, just because I haven't been doing very many of them. I don't know if that really answers the question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think for me, it was like, I think like at the I did a handful of live streams over the summer. And I think at the very beginning, when maybe people were like seemingly more, I don't know, it seemed to me like people were like pretty excited about them at the beginning. And then, you know, people are still doing live streams and attending them, but I think they're like a little fewer and further in between. And so something I noticed was that like people were tuning in from all over the world. I mean, just like we're talking right now, and we're both actually, in terms of geographic location, like pretty close relative to a lot of the people who are probably listening are based in Berlin or elsewhere in Europe. So that part to me is exciting. And I do think I like maybe connected with some people from abroad, but yeah, I think that I definitely have been very cognizant of sort of the like, am I getting asked to do this? Which this has always been the case for me though, because am I the only like femme brown person on this lineup, and is that why I'm being asked? And sort of like, trying to be cognizant of that. Okay, well, we have lots of questions. So another one is, what is your preferred DAW these days?
I use Logic.
I use Ableton.
Yeah, very simple. I don't know how to use Ableton at all. It always like, it seems like something I would really like, and I just have never tried to use it.
Yeah, I actually used Pro Tools for many, many, many years. Like I started using a DAW when I was 18. So I think I switched over like to Ableton just like a few years ago. So yeah, I was using Pro Tools for like more than 10 years. And then I was also very intimidated by Ableton, but I will say that making the leap is not that bad once you like get around and like feel it out a little bit. But also, I think, you know, choose whatever works for you. It took me a while to get into the like live aspect of Ableton, which I use now, but I really just used it as kind of in the same way that I used Pro Tools when I first started. And then somebody else asked like kind of a related question is about presets. If I could ask, what are your favorite presets that you use? I don't know. There's a lot of, I guess that could be like interpreted in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't use very many presets on any of the equipment I use, really. I mean, a lot of my work is very sample based. So I spend a lot of my time recording audio or going through recordings that I've made and like manipulating them in some way. So I don't really like, I don't use tons of like set presets on anything. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I also like don't necessarily use presets. I might start with this preset just as, just to like play around with it and then change the parameters. I will say I really like shimmer reverb.
Yes.
I will say, yeah. Which is like, for those of you who don't, you can also just make your own shimmer reverb. It's where you like, the reverb is actually pitched. It's like you take the sound information and it's pitched up, usually an octave or two. And then the reverb that you're hearing is actually the reverberated version of that pitched up signal. So it has this really ethereal quality that's really lovely. Otherwise, yeah, I don't know. Lots of like, I feel like there's that's like a whole other discussion. No offense, sorry to the person who asked. I maybe have to.
Mm-hmm. I guess the Logic, like a lot of the tools in Logic are actually they actually don't sound so bad. I guess I'll say that I have a lot of plugins, but some of the like factory like plugins are actually not so bad. I'll say that. I don't know.
Yeah, I will say on presets, something that I feel like has been a constant pattern is like when I play a sound or hear a preset in like an isolated way, sometimes I'll like, especially like with like a synth sound that maybe is like kind of vintage or sounds like it's from a certain era or from a certain song, I'll be like, oh, too whatever, right? Too slap bass, too 90s, too whatever. And then, but when I think if you like put a sound or a preset, as it were, in the context of like other music, when you're working on a full arrangement, I think you can get away with sort of like yucky nostalgia or something that maybe sounds like could be like cheesy sounding, and I think that often works. So
yeah,
don't play down that. That's not really the question that was asked, but something that I've been like thinking about more recently. Yeah. So someone else asked, how has COVID changed or shifted any visions you might have had about your artwork and practice?
That's a big.
we could have talked about that for the whole time. I think.
I feel like I'm still figuring that out. Yeah. To be honest, I'm not. It is shifting my work in big ways, but I'm not sure how yet.
Yeah. For me, like I had like 40 shows get canceled, I think.
Oh my God.
I had a whole, so I would have been in Europe. I've played 2 festivals in Europe. DICE was one last year, and I was supposed to do a whole like month-long Europe tour in April that got canceled. And a lot of festivals over the summer. So it was sort of the end of my album cycle for my album Parted Plains that came out last August. So, a year and a few months ago now. And then as a result of that, I was home and in a way that I hadn't planned. I basically was just like, I'm just going to be touring from spring to summer. And that was, even into fall, that was the plan. So we talked about this a little earlier, but I made an EP in April called Meditations Mixtape Volume 1 that was really totally a result of this happening. I don't know if I would have made that album if the pandemic hadn't happened. And I think the collaborative, like Galdra Visions, that collaborative EP, like, it might have happened. I don't know if I would have probably tried to put aside time to record that, but it's hard to know like what I think I would have made time for and other things. Whereas I feel like other things have come up. For me personally, some really cool opportunities. Like I had this sound design project that came up that I spent months working on. It was like a freelance gig that I don't know if it would have come up. I don't know if I would have been able to do it. And like a couple other things, like I didn't actually end up getting this gig, but someone was trying to have me work on a score for like a VR video game. And so like I pitched music for it. It didn't end up happening, but that was something where I was like, oh, if I had been touring during this time, like there's no way I would have been able to set time aside to do that. And then for me now, I'm kind of can't say 100. Well, this is it is 100%, but I can't really announce it yet. But I'm going to be teaching in computer music and digital arts at a college to undergraduate university students starting in January for a full year. Which I'm super excited about, but that was another thing. I don't know if I would be able to say yes to, or, if I had kind of continued on with touring and kind of the like traditional album cycle. So for me, it's been a lot of like, just kind of taking things as they come. And I think that things are going to just kind of like, if they're allowed to for me, I think that my life, I will choose for my life to like go back to the way it was, where I like put out a record and go on tour, as long as like I can get those gigs. I don't know. That's that. Just say. Someone else asked, if there is time, would we talk a little bit about our creative processes for collaborative? Oh, I think we did talk about that a little bit. So, or maybe, did we talk about it in COVID? Maybe you want to talk about, Taja, how your collaborations worked in a normal time.
Yeah, I'm a very shy musician in general. And I feel like I like to have some degree of control over what my contributions are, just because I guess in some ways I have a practice that incorporates improvisation, but not in any traditional sense, I guess. So a lot of times when I've collaborated with people, it has been a lot of file sharing. It has been a lot of like preparing sounds at least, or preparing some vague sense of what I might do, and then also and then presenting that or meeting up to kind of discuss that. But there have been some rare cases of like just collaborating together in a room. And I did that a lot with like Kevin Beasley when we did a performance at the Whitney a while ago, where we would just meet up and jam, which I'm like, I do not jam, but like we did that for just like hours for weeks, which was really great and really new for me. So those tend to be the two main modes, I guess, in non-COVID times.
Totally. Yeah. And that's sort of, I think it really depends to me, like the collaborative process like changes depending on the other people or person involved, and like what their fluency is with music, what their tendency is, and like where and how many people, and what kind of music. I guess I have another collaborative project that's sort of just been on hold for a long time called Raw Silk, where I play with a cellist, and she's like a super talented, she's like classically trained and then sort of got into like improvising and jamming on her own, but also has like no electronic music or production background, or like didn't before we worked together. So yeah, so we would like get together, and I often would start with some sort of like a drone or a beat or like synth, some sort of line, and then we would like just jam over top, and then she would be like, what if it went like this? And she would kind of talk through her like production ideas, and I would kind of, you know, twiddle in Ableton Live. And but you know, it's funny because my partner and I will admittedly say that this is my partner's gear, so everyone who's like, ooh, modular,
I've been wondering about that.
I did this setup because like I was like, everything on my side of the studio is like totally messy. And like, I mean, granted, modular is messy, but that's like what makes it cool. But this is our matriarch, and then his modular, I will say. But it's funny because we kind of collaborate on and off. It's touch and go, but he does not jam. He's like not into jamming. It's like not his thing at all. And he is more like interested in like crafting sound and crafting songs. Whereas I would say I like both. I kind of like, I can come, I think that I end up learning a lot from jamming. It's not like my normal, it's not necessarily the first thing I always do when I'm making music, but yeah, I think for me, it just really depends on like who I'm working with and what their musical background is too.
Yeah. I feel like I maybe just think about, which I guess I never really thought of as collaboration in a traditional sense, but I really like learning other people's music and just playing other people's music and not having as much creative input.
Totally.
A collaboration in a very different way, but I really love that. And I play with other people. I play with Anna Wise and with Helado Negro, and it's really awesome to just kind of like dive deep into someone else's worlds and like bring what you bring to that, but really kind of like trying to play that music in a way that feels right with the people that you're playing with. I love that.
Yes. I have been like a backup singer twice, and it was like some of the most fun experiences musically I've ever had, just to have like a more technical role, to learn parts and just be like, this is it, I'm going to own these parts. Yeah. I think that's the extent of our questions. If anybody has another question, jump in, or else, and we're way over time here, but I think we had a nice chat, so hopefully that's okay. But I think we're gonna move on to THC is gonna play some tunes. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Taja. Yeah.
Great to finally meet, Ami.
Yeah, so good to meet you. Yeah, it's funny because I realized like I had forgotten about that Kickstarter interview. I don't know if we're still like live or not, but I had totally forgotten about that Kickstarter interview you did. And then when I was like searching your name in my email, I had like emailed that article to someone. And in this, so for background, I mean, not Kickstarter, sorry, the Creative Independent. I think that was like right before I was quitting a full-time job that was not working for me. But I was kind of struggling with that feeling of like finding the balance of like, do I keep working this full-time job and having music on top of that or not? And so, yeah, it was,
Right.
All right. I think let's wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. Cool. Thanks, Taja.
Thank you.